welcome and thank you for supporting the Montana Book Festival. This is the Memoir on a Mission reading, and I would also like to thank MCAT for recording and giving such a generous grant to this event. We're going to be hearing from two authors here, Heather Hansen and Susan Purvis. We're going to do about 3 to 5 minutes of reading per their request, and then we're going to open it up to discussion. So I will introduce Susan first. She is an empowerment speaker, explorer, educator, and author of the best-selling and award-winning adventure memoir, Go Find, My Journey to Find the Lost, and Myself, available for purchase here at Fact and Fiction. Susan spent her entire career in the outdoors. She's worked in the hottest, the highest, and the coldest places on the planet. Her memoir chronicles 2 decades of saving lives and teaching humans and canines to do the same. She found passion and purpose in training avalanche dogs and search dogs. She's also a renowned educator and entertaining speaker with over 20 years of public speaking experience. And she owns Trusted Butte Outdoors in Whitefish, Montana, and she teaches wilderness medicine and avalanche courses around the world, and is an alum of the University of Montana. So let's give it up for Susan Purvis.
You know what else? I wanted to say, hey, thanks. This is so terrific. But I just drove into town from Whitefish, and 39 years ago, it's true, I am old. I started at the University of Montana, and I was a young gal from the Midwest, up on the shores of Lake Superior. And so I had a lot of reflection coming in, going, look, I'm speaking at the Montana Book Festival. I wrote a book, and, am I still the same person, or have I changed? And the conclusion was...
Both.
Yeah, I'm pretty much still the same. My best friend from, second grades here. What would you say, Sarah? I'm still the same, right? Pretty much.
Still the same.
Yeah. And so, shout out to MCAT, because in 1989, I went down to the Amazon to document on the rape and pillage of the Amazon in 1989 in a Cessna. My friend and I flew in a 177 Cessna from Missoula, Montana to the Amazon and back. And I came back with 17 hours of footage, and I thought, I need to make a movie. I didn't know anything about storytelling or making a movie. And then I found MCAT, which is Montana Community Access Television. And so I had my 2, Mary Catton maybe, and Marty. They were my mentors, and I made a 25-minute documentary on the Amazon. I still have the old footage, and I need to go back now because, look, how many years later, 30 years later, it's in the news, and probably the place I reported on is probably devastated, and flattened, and there's no more rainforest there. So kudos to MCAT, because you guys, you helped. And the message in all this is you can't make a movie by yourself, you can't write a book by yourself, right? It takes a village to get the work done. And a big round of applause for the Montana Book Festival. This is a big job. Woo. It's. You can probably hear me now that I'm closer to the microphone. What am I supposed to do now?
Go ahead and...
Oh, no. Really? Okay, I promise, give me the ding-ding after about 2.5 minutes, because I'm a fan of keeping it short and sweet. I pitched... Here's how I'll pitch my book to you, because when you're in the writing process, you have to find a literary agent, and so you have to pitch your book. So I like to say Go Find is the intersection of Into Thin Air. Remember, the seriousness of Into Thin Air, the silliness of Marley and Me, and the internal discovery of Eat, Pray, and Love. Ooh, but you want to know what my book is really about? I like to say, and my book opens up with this scene, and I'm going to read it to you. After 3 years of writing my story, I wrote a piece that became really the end of my book. And I had to answer these questions, and I thought, 10 years into my career with my search and rescue dog, I thought, how come it's easier for me to jump out of the side of a helicopter at 13,000 feet with my avalanche dog in my lap to find a dead guy than it is to talk to my husband about our 18-year relationship together. Why do you think that's so funny, ma'am?
I can so relate.
I know. So I thought I was just going to write a book about our adventures, and then, oh no, that came cropping up into my mind. I remember, Sarah, you came to my house and when I had just written that piece, and I'm like, will you burn it? What am I going to do with it? And then I had to spend another 7 years answering that question in my book. So raise your hand if there's any writers in the room. Or, yeah, and you maybe want to get a memoir out. Put some needles under your nails and pray. I don't know. It's a long haul. Okay, so that's where I'll go with this. I'll just read a couple minutes into my first chapter. This book takes place in Crested Butte, Colorado. Raise of hands, who's been there? A few of us, yay. There's a big connection between Montana and Colorado, but Montana wins. That's why we all live here. Okay. Chapter 1, Last Ditch Effort. The summer of 2005, Ouray, Colorado. If the helicopter shifts, we're dead. Dead like the guy we're looking for. So much can go wrong up here. Peering out the open door, I look down at the fast-moving, unforgiving terrain. Far above the tree line, where the air is thin, volcanic rocks break into huge spires and fins. Freeze-thaw cycles have crumbled the cliffs into strange gargoyle-like shapes, and every crevice is filled with snow. Are you guys with me? Okay. Tasha, my black Labrador retriever and avalanche dog partner, is wedged between the pilot and me. Her bum presses against the pilot's right hip while she digs her furry elbows into my thighs and settles her barrel chest onto my lap. Her webbed feet, splayed wide from years of digging and avalanche debris, dangle off my legs and onto the helicopter's open doorway. In our haste to hot-load the helicopter moments ago, I had nixed Tasha's restraining device. As the helicopter blades shave air closer to the towering 13,000-foot peak, I vice grip her neck with my arm, pulling her closer, concerned she'll try to jump out or scramble on to the pilot's lap. 39 days earlier, I'm kind of jumping ahead, a single-engine airplane crashed on White House Mountain, killing all 4 passengers on board. Richard Mills, the man we're looking for, his 4-year-old son, and his parents. So 3 generations of family gets wiped out in this plane crash up at 13,000 feet. Days of bad weather, coupled by avalanche hazard and extreme terrain, had thwarted any rescue efforts. Eventually, members of the local search and rescue team, Ouray Mountain Rescue, were transported to the wreckage one by one. Over several weeks of searching, they found strewn over a half-mile path pieces of twisted metal, clothing, children's books, and 3 partially buried bodies. The team located all but Richard. Then, deeming the recovery mission too dangerous, the local sheriff had suspended the search until now. All hope is on my 60-pound retriever and 5'3" me. We're the last-ditch effort, and we've got 1 hour to find him. And I'll just, any black lab owners in the audience? Yeah, a few. Okay, you know how naughty they are. So the night before, I get to the hotel at midnight, because we had a 5 a.m. helicopter ride, and my dog nosed open my suitcase in my hotel room while I had run up to my truck and ate a week's worth supply of dog food, plastic bag and all. And the room was hot, and she was like a stuffed sausage. Her belly got bigger and bigger all night long. She's jumping back and forth, so we didn't get any sleep. And I show up, with this team I have never trained with before, and I got this stuffed sausage, black lab, and they're looking at me like, really? We called you in? So, anyway, that's that. So here is Heather.
Thank you, Susan. And now we're going to hear from Heather Hansman. Heather, as she unintentionally outed herself, is from Seattle. What neighborhood?
Bollingford.
Nice.
Yeah, I'm an interloper.
She's an award-winning journalist whose work has appeared in Outside, California Sunday, the Smithsonian, and many other publications. Her first book, Downriver, came out in 2019. And after a decade of raft guiding across the U.S., she now lives in Seattle. Let's give it up for Heather.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for tolerating me, even though I'm not Montana. And I realized I probably should have gone first because I feel really lame after that intro for Susan. I did not jump out of any flying planes in my book. So I feel like a little bit of a poser. But this book, Downriver, that just came out this spring, is about a trip that I took down the length of the Green River in Wyoming, a little bit of Colorado and Utah. And I paddled the length of it to basically look at how people use water along that river, from ranchers to cities to fish biologists to rafters, to kind of look at what's going to happen with that river currently and in the future with climate change and drought. So I feel like I kind of backdoored my way into a mentor. Turns out I kind of set out to write a science book. But books like that, Susan and I were talking at lunch about kind of why we want to write books and what kind of books we want to write. And I feel like my big goal in this is like trying to write a book that I want to read. And it turns out a lot of books about science and rivers are pretty boring. And the way that it felt interesting to make that tangible and real was to kind of give myself, put myself in that story and look at what the river actually looks like from the ground. So I figured I'd read you guys just a little bit from the beginning, which is right. Has anyone ever been to Green River Lakes it's in Pinedale, Wyoming? Yeah. It's like the most beautiful place in the entire world. It's so cool. And it's just across the divide from Jackson Hole, but nobody ever goes there. So it's a really, really special place. So this is at the beginning of the Green River in Wyoming. Before lunch, we hit the first real rapid, Moose Creek, a narrow, jagged rock sluice that had looked fast and pinchy when we'd driven past it the night before, peering into the gorge from the road. Now, with skimpy early season flows, there's barely enough water to split the guts of the glacially eroded granite. A few fly fishermen flick their lines into the pools above it as we pull into an eddy upstream of them to scout the rapids, looking downriver into the nash of white water. The river pillows up, then drops over a horizon line. We can't see beyond, but it looks like there's enough water to sneak our tubby little pack rafts through. Mike decides to walk around. Ben and I slide back in our boats and paddle out into the center channel. The current swells up as I tee up to the top wave, pointing my bow into the break. I had been nervous, sure that I'd been off the water for too long, uncomfortable in a new boat, uncertain how my body would hold up, or whether it was stupid and stubborn to try to take a trip this long. My paddle clashes with the rock, shaking me off my line, and then I'm in the trough of the wave train, fighting to stay upright. There's a specific joy in reading water and in knowing the micro adjustments necessary to find a tongue of fast current and thread through the shallow, ribby rapids, and my muscle memory comes back in the quick twitch of white water. I run through clean. It's over in a flurry of frantic paddle strokes and a smack of just melted glacier to the face. Ben cleans it too and catches up to me in the slack water below the rapid. We tamp down our nervous laughs, catch our breath, turn and point our boats downstream. We're paddling through the headwaters of the Green River, the largest, most remote, and least developed tributary of the Colorado River, which brings water to nearly 40 million people across the western U.S. It's crucial, it's overused, and it's a risk. There are deeply divisive battles over the water we're currently floating. The green starts here, and the glaciated high alpine of Wyoming's Wind River Range, then winds through hundreds of miles of sagebrush flats, scrubby plains, tight gorges, and empty gaslands to the Red Rock Desert of Utah's Canyonlands National Park, where it meets up with the main stem of the Colorado. Because the landscape between here and there is remote and rugged, the Green and its tributaries have been touched far less than most other rivers in the West, which are overtapped thanks to human population growth and decades-long drought. It's one of the only parts of the river system with significant water left to squeeze out, but all the signs of Western development, from coal to cattle to cities, are here. And as populations swell in cities like Denver and Salt Lake, and as climate change shrinks stream flows, the question of how the water in this river is used and how far it can be stretched is becoming more urgent. It's a question of whether our current way of living is sustainable in a drier, increasingly crowded West, and how it will have to change if it isn't. The Green is at the heart of that question, and I want to know what the answer might be. So I'm here, white-knuckling my paddle in a stretch of water I've never seen before, because I decided the best way to understand it was the best way I know to understand a lot of things, from the river. Susan and I were thinking that because we have this chance to kind of sit here and talk to each other and talk to you guys, that we chat through memoirs and why we wanted to write these books and kind of how we think about them. So if you guys have questions, hit us. And otherwise, I have questions for Susan.
Yeah, and I have
There's
questions
not-
for you. Well, I just wanted to say off your piece, let's just do this perhaps.
We can just kind of cover.
No, but yeah, we can pass it around. My question was, I'm a science girl, I'm a geologist by training, and I left Colorado because I pay attention to the water, and I knew there was going to be a water war in Colorado, so I moved back to Montana, specifically whitefish, because I know I could just go put my bucket in Whitefish Lake, it's still pretty clean, and kind of live off the land for a while. And there won't be water wars, say, in Montana versus Colorado. So thank you for sharing your story. And tell us what was your inciting incident, or, got you interested in this subject?
Yeah, I think that's a really good, important point, and obviously I'm a little biased. I just wrote a book about water, but I think water is going to be one of the most important issues kind of in our generation, going forward. And to me, like she mentioned, I've been a raft guide for a long time. I kind of made my living on the river, but this idea of water rights and water policy and who got access to water and where the fights were going to be felt like this really sort of like vague, intangible thing that I couldn't really understand. And I was somebody I was like, I care about this, but like, why, when anybody starts talking about water rights, do my eyeballs start rolling back in my head? So I wanted to find a way to make that sort of like interesting and tangible. And so it's sort of me, I think I selfishly was trying to answer a question for myself in writing this book.
And what'd you find out?
Turns out it's really complicated. It's going to be really complicated. I've got a book for you to read. I mean, big picture is that policy-wise, there's more water allocated than actually exists in the system, which means that the math doesn't line up, which means that the way we're doing things now is not going to work out. But that doesn't mean that it can't work out through people changing how they do things. So it's a little, my mom read a bunch of versions of this while I was working on it, and she kind of got to the end of the first one and was like, can you make it a little bit less depressing? I can't really. So yeah, it's going to be hard and it's going to be scary. And for me, the idea of, there's a guy who's sort of one of my big river mentors. He started a big rafting company, and his big sort of, overarching value statement is that we say what we love and we love what we know. And so I think that a lot of times to care about something, you really have to kind of have your hands in it and know what it's like. So that for me, that was a really big part of the story. And I think in getting people to care about water and issues like that in general, that's a big part of it, kind of having that like hands-on, tangible story. And that maybe gets into my big question for you, which is that you kind of had these, pretty unique out there experiences. How did you decide that it was a book? How did you kind of think that like all these parts were going to come together and you had a story to tell?
Great question. I think I knew I was going to write a book in the 3rd grade. And it's so fun to have Sarah here. I'm sorry to pick on you, Sarah, but we went through high school in a volunteer English program. So we really never went to it. So I had to put my dreams aside to be a writer, even though, like, I remember in like 1980 when I was here, like Outside magazine came out, and I'm like, oh, I want to write for Outside. You did, I didn't. Dang it.
You can submit it. I can do it.
But I'm like, oh, I don't, I can't afford to be a writer, right? Because back in the day, I was broke. And I would go on these big adventures. I rode my bike from, Missoula to Alaska on my bike, and I'm like, oh, I want to write about that. And I never did because I didn't have the courage. I didn't know what my voice was and who would care. So finally, we go through our lives, maybe following a path less desired. I worked as a gold exploration geologist in Latin America. That's how I made my money. And at some point I said, like, I don't care about making money, and, I need to, find my purpose and passion. Now I just lost your track. What did you ask me?
Why'd you want to write a book?
Oh, yeah. So I knew, I switched gears. My inciting incident for my book is I had one foot in the mud in the Dominican Republic. My husband and I at the time were commuting from Colorado, Crested Butte, to the Dominican Republic to look for gold, and then I had one foot in the snow, and I said, I want to be on ski patrol. I want to learn how to save lives. I didn't know anything about avalanches. I didn't know anything about medicine. I didn't know about search and rescue or leadership. And I heard when I was at ski patrol school about an avalanche that happened across the street. And you guys know this stuff. It happens right here on Mount Jumbo. You're like, are you kidding me? Like in this town, somebody was killed. And then I was here speaking last year, and then the same thing happened again. So why do these urban avalanche happen, and people are getting killed? So I learned about this avalanche. This is 1995. We're across the street from Crested Butte Ski Resort. Sunday morning, 9 a.m., the father was putting the luggage into the shuttle bus to bring him back to Houston, Texas. The 4, 4, and 6-year-old were out playing in front of the condos, and this wall of snow came down and buried all 3 children. And these guys from Houston are like, what? No warning. And see ya, Rita. And so eventually the ski patrol dog, they had a dog at the time, came over to look for the kids. And I was leaning in going, what'd the dog do? Wow, dogs find people in the snow? And he was telling me the story, and the dog failed to find the kids. And I thought, well, isn't that the only reason why you train a dog? They can't not miss them. And the answer that they gave me wasn't good enough. And it was at that moment I thought, what if I trained a dog to save a life? And in that moment, I vowed to never leave anyone behind. So that put me on the path over the next 20 years to train the best possible dog and never leave anyone behind. It was also the same year I said to my husband, till death do us part. Now, so once, I was living this life that needed to be told because, one, did you guys know dogs find people in the water? Do you know what dogs are looking for? There was, it's part science and part, the journey of me training this naughty little black lab, but I was probably just as naughty as she was. And it's a really gripping story about the politics of search and rescue. I was an outsider coming into a tight mountain community. I have to be careful what I say. MCAT's filming this. Oh, no. And so once that career was over, I moved to Montana and said, I'm going to write a book about this. And I remember looking at my girlfriend. She was painting my house, and I go, Kim, do you think I could write this book in 3 months? And she's like, well, Sue, I don't see why not. 10 years later, so I finally had the story to tell. So this year, 10 years into this process, I finally said, I wrote an article and I got money for it. I spent years writing this article. It was 1,700 words, and I got a check for $50. And I looked in the mirror and I said, I'm a writer. So that was my, I finally had the confidence, the financial wherewithal to sit down and try to write a book. Because it costs, you guys know who are artists and writers, it's not easy. Well, it was difficult for me. I shouldn't speak for anybody.
Super easy for me.
Does anybody have a question, or do you want to?
Alright, let's open up for discussion.
Looks like we got one in the back there.
I actually have a couple questions, unless someone else wants to jump in. Susan, you said at the beginning you can't write a book alone, which I agree with. I'm wondering for both of you, what does that look like for you, maybe with respect to this particular book, or just in general? What does not writing alone look like?
Great question. So our question was, how do we write with a community, and how much time do we have to spend ourselves? Well, there was the many mornings, you just have to go sit I sit on the ball, but it's good. I surrounded myself with a writing group, Authors of the Flathead. So if anybody lives in the Flathead Valley, it's Writers Helping Writers. They've been around for 29 years. Actually, we have a writing conference this weekend. And I went to the first meeting, and a group of people were there to help writers. And I thought, oh my God, I was drawn to Whitefish, Montana. I don't even really know why, except because we went there for the water. And there was only 4 things I needed to know how to do. So if you were thinking about writing, do you know what the 4 rules are? Write a lot, read a lot, hang out with writers, and study your craft. And really the only rule is don't bore your reader. And so I had to learn structure and function of writing, but I was in a critique group, and every week, I've been with these women for 10 years, we meet. I mean, they're like my best friends. I can't do anything without them. So that was my journey. You know, we have to share. And then at some point you have to leave that group and get some real feedback, because it's hard to be honest with your friends sometimes because they don't want to hear it.
Yeah, I'm very jealous of that writing. That sounds really cool, because I feel like for me at least, writing can be a really, really solitary thing. And sort of the hardest part, especially in terms of a book, is that you're kind of on the island by yourself for a really, really, really long, painful time with, you know, pins under your fingernails or whatever it is. But I think, like you were saying, there's a huge amount of value, and I think it can be really easy to be precious and not want to let anyone read your stuff when you're working on it, but there's so much value in getting other eyes on it, both in terms of like, hey, this is good, keep going, and like, oh, this doesn't really make sense. So I think you need, especially with a big project, you really need, like, you know, eyes outside of your own head to make it work. So, but yeah, that idea of having a crew that you meet with every week, I'm very jealous.
You're accountable.
Yeah. I'd be curious, what's your process like? Like when you're actually writing, what do your days look like, or how do you work through it?
Well, that depends if it's a powder day. So everything kind of is around the powder day or the boating day. So, and then, you know, we can't quit our day job. So I teach for a living. But what I did for a while, I would get up at 5 a.m. and work, you know, in the silence of no distractions, no Facebook, no telephone, and try to get 3 or 4 hours in. And just, you know, and I spent probably a year doing the structure and function of the book, because to me that's key. It's you can't build a house by just, you know, slapping sticks up. So you have to really think about your plot points, your inciting incident, you know, your climax, how it's going to end, but again, you know, write it, and then we have our Authors of the Flathead meets every week, so you can go read your storyline, and they're looking at you like going, what? Who? You know, we don't understand this, and then you go back with more work. But I'm not, now that I call myself a writer, and once I owned that title, I can go in and create information now, and that makes me feel good, because it's a lot of discipline. Even though I had my own business for 25 years, writing, you've got to just sit down and do it. How about you? Do you want to share your secrets?
Yeah, I'm real weird about giving myself discipline. I make myself go for a commute in the morning, even though I work from home. So then I'm like on and working at 9 a.m. I will set a timer and be like, you're just gonna have to write for an hour. Do this right now. I think like the making, like you were saying, the writing, the reading, the being around people, those are all parts of it. But I think the actually sitting down and writing is the hardest part.
Yeah.
And it can be, question there.
Can you talk a little bit, both of you, about the editorial process on, like, did you have an agent first? Did you have finished work first? Did you sell on proposal? Like, how did both of those journeys look like for both of you?
Yeah. I'm a magazine journalist before I wrote books, and I had an agent find a story that I had written and emailed me and was kind of like, I've read your stuff, I like it, you know, if you're thinking about book ideas, would you want to work together? And I basically, I lucked out big time, but I basically emailed her back and was like, yep, totally, like, I've got tons of book ideas, but I'm leaving to go on a river trip, can we talk in a week? And she like emailed me back, was like, yeah, great, and I was like, oh shit, I need a book idea. And on this, and my grad school thesis had been on water use and that kind of thing, and I went on this river trip that happened to be with a bunch of water managers, and while I was out there, it was on the Yampa in Colorado, I was like, oh, I think this is the nut of it, this water use thing. And I came back, and it turns out the agent was like fairy godmother. And I was like, I have this idea about how people fight about water. And she was like, that's like a topic, that's not a book. You need to figure out what a book is actually going to be. And so then I kind of came up with the narrative line. And then shopped around the proposal. Nobody bought it the first round, shopped it around again, somebody wanted it. So I think, I don't maybe have a lot of great insight on that, but I think a lot of it is like grinding and lucking into, you know, like putting yourself out there and reaching out to the right people, and also having thick skin and like not getting beat up if people reject you. Because a lot of it was timing, and I was an unknown person, and like, I think it's pretty arbitrary sometimes why you connect with somebody or why something hits. So yeah, I think tough skin maybe even more than like sitting and writing is the hard part. But yeah, you've got a good story too, don't you?
Yeah, mine's completely opposite. She has a master's degree in writing. I have no writing skills. Okay, so we have this person and then me. So I'm, yay. So I had to learn how to write, and I wrote for a very long time with the help of they call themselves my midwives because they help me birth this thing. Okay, they're a bunch of old ladies, but I love them to death. And I hate it when I call them old ladies. So I finally had enough courage, and my manuscript I thought was almost done, and it was 120,000 words. Do you guys know how many pages that is? It's a lot. That's about just shy of 400 pages. And I applied to the Banff Wilderness and Mountain writing program. It's a 21-day writing residency. So you guys, there's all kinds of writing residencies out there. So I was selected one of 6 internationally, and there was 2 mentors. My mentor, so we spent 21 days in Banff during the Mountain Film Festival, and there's also a book festival. And I sent my manuscript off to my mentor, his name was Anthony, and he'd been working for Random House UK for 40 years. It was called something else before then. And he was responsible for Touching the Void. Have you guys read that book? Yeah, about the disaster in South America. So he read it and he's like, "Oh my God, Sue, Marnie, my colleague and I, we love your storyline. If you do this right, it'll be a commercial success. We would love to have you come to our program." And I'm like, so as writers, we need breaks. We need luck. We need to get out there, and somebody has to love your story. For me, so just how did I get my agent? So Angie was also at the program, and she's got her PhD in literature. So she was like on her 6th book, just cranking them out. She can write them with her eyes shut, and I'm like, oh, I wish I had your writing chops. But she liked me, and I liked my story. We became friends. So she came down to Whitefish, Montana from Canada, because we have a literary journal called the Whitefish Review. Anybody familiar with it? Yeah. And Brian, the owner, invited Angie down to read, and she goes, "Well, did you know Sue Purvis, who stays home in her closet, nobody knows I'm writing a book," said she's about finished with her book. And so I got to read. I got to stand up here just like I did in front of you, and I read my entire chapter, that chapter 1. It was 10 minutes. Oh my God. And she brought another writer down, and he says to me, I hadn't even read yet, and he goes, "Send your manuscript to my literary agent. He lives in New York City." And I'm like, "You do that for me?" That was the first time anybody offered a literary agent to me. And I sent it. He loved my book. He called me and he was crying on the phone. I'm like, "Bob, you're crying?" He's a 65-year-old grown man. I'm like, "What are you crying about?" And he's like, "And your dog. She left it all on the table." And he's like, "Damn that husband." Anyway, that's what he said too, in the same breath. Okay, so he and I, he's a literary agent, but he worked for Simon & Schuster as a senior vice president editor. So he came from the editing, publishing world, and then started his own agency. So he was really my primary editor, and he was my agent. And once we got my book squared away, he really sold my book in like a week. Because it's a compelling story. My theory is either you're a really good writer or you have a really good story. So the middle thing is tough, right? And there's not that many people I know in the Flathead Valley that have actually traditionally published books, right? It's tough. It's a tough. So our writers' conference, we bring in agents and editors from New York City who are in the business, so you can pitch to them, talk to them. Our 30th anniversary is next year.
Is there more questions on that?
So you have a background in journalism, and Susan, said you had a background in science, yet you both wrote these memoirs. So just curious how inserting this I character...
Yeah. Well, we talked about it. You get a lolly.
Yeah.
I'll let you start with that one. Yeah, we talked about it at lunch.
Okay.
You can start because
I can start.
That was a big deal for you,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I was very self-conscious about putting myself in the book because it felt like I was trying to write this like serious policy book, and it felt sort of soft to be like, well, then here's me having this adventure. But I thought a lot about books, like I said earlier, kind of like what I like to read, and the books that I love the most have a strong narrative voice and have somebody that you can kind of like track and follow. Somebody like we were talking about Pam Houston at lunch, or Gretel Ehrlich, or Barbara Kingsolver. You know, you have these characters. I don't like books where I don't like any of the characters. I have a problem with that. And so I wanted, you know, the narrative voice to be something that people could really relate to and sort of like follow through. And then that kind of becomes like a craft question where like how much do I punch up the me? How much do I punch up the sources that I'm talking to? And I think that balance can be really different depending on the book. But I think, yeah, for me, I was very insecure and self-conscious about doing that, but I'm really glad that I did. And most of the feedback on the book that I've gotten is that people wanted more voice, which is nice to hear, but also was like, oh yeah, duh, I knew that. Like, that's what I like. So, yeah.
I only know how to write first person present tense for the most part. I mean, oh my God. I'm thinking if I had to create a novel, like third person, you know, I'm like, oh my God, how do you do it? So my strength now and my power is telling it from my point of view, because those are the stories I read as well.
So you both came to your books, I mean, you mentioned 3 women, you both came to writing your books with like a knowledge of, or like an affinity for certain types of writing or writers.
Totally. And I think, like you mentioned earlier, I think the best and the most fun way to get good at writing is reading a lot and sort of getting, I can't remember, maybe it's Ira Glass or somebody says that, it's like you can, part of like learning your voice and learning what you like is reading a lot of other stuff and being like, ooh, yeah, I like how they do that. And reading almost critically and sort of being like, okay, how did they insert themselves? How, you know, what tense are they using there? And I think like figuring out your taste and figuring out what, you know, what feels natural to you, and then also what you like, and kind of trying to almost like fake it till you make it, you know, like emulate and pull pieces, and, you know, like, oh, how did they do that? I don't know, I get really dorky about that, but that kind of, how did their sentence structure work out? How did they, you know, how did they decide, you know, when you're writing, you know what's going to happen, but the reader doesn't necessarily know what's going to happen, so you get to decide how much of your discovery and your kind of voyage you get to put in. And I love trying to figure out how writers do that. I think that's kind of the most interesting part of it, especially for first person memoir. There I was, here's what happened. I think that can be kind of like the most interesting part of the puzzle. Yeah.
So you both are writing in this genre of memoir, but there's also an intersection of nonfiction and education and educating people, and I'm wondering what life beyond the book has looked like, around teaching, public speaking, classroom, sort of life beyond the book, and has it created a platform for you in other ways?
Yeah, we talked about this at lunch. So here's what I'll tell you, because
You guys should have been at lunch.
so let's say this is my little black lab. I made a promise to her in 1995, right? You know, we're going to save lives and never leave anyone behind. So I think of my little black lab as the center of a wheel, okay? And then my life for 25 years is everything around that now. So what did that little black dog do? She gave me my business. That's how I make my money. Crested Butte Outdoors is my company. So I became an educator in avalanche and wilderness medicine. So I'm teaching humans and canines how to save lives. It gave me a voice. It gave me the ability to stand up to small town politics, and especially men who are bullies. It gave me a means to make my own money and not lean so heavily on my husband at the time. It gave me a book. It's given me a platform. It's given me a website. It gives me the ability to keynote speak, all because of that little black lab. Because what I could do is I could now talk, because I became the expert at one thing, and that was training a dog, even though I was getting trained at the same time. And that led into everything else that I do. So, you know, what do literary agents look for? I don't know if that's what you're after in this room, but the first thing Bob said to me is he's like, well, prove to me that's who you are. Where's all your data to back up that you think you're so awesome, right? So you've got to, create that. Like she had a following, right? Because she was in, sophisticated magazines.
Super famous.
Yeah, like amazing. So luckily I kept and archived everything. And so you have to prove to yourself that you are the expert. So my message would be to become an expert at one thing, and then everything follows. Did I answer your question on that?
And it sounds like you do have a
Yeah, and now my keynote.
diverse.
Yeah, and I've been to probably 80 events. My book came out 11 months ago, so I've been on the road probably to 80 events. I'd like to say it's not how many, but who shows up. And and just so, for those of you who are writing out there, I had to ask that book specifically what I wanted it to do. Well, to be truly honest, I said, I want it to be a New York Times bestseller, because I thought, I wonder if I could do that as a non-writer. Well, okay, I did let that go, but I want it to empower, especially young women, to say, or really anybody, if you have purpose and passion, stay on your track. Because life tries to wobble you off your path. And you find joy and happiness and contentment when you know you're on your path. So I help people find their way, so to speak, now, as a post-book. I can tell when people are not on their path, and I question why they're not. And then, we know the excuses, right? Raise your hand, you guys, if you feel like you're on path. Yay. That's great. That's really great. Yeah, so but you have time, right? You didn't reinvent yourself.
And I think another thing we talked about, we keep talking about lunch, but we got really chatty, is calling yourself a writer, and that sort of like self-confidence to like possess that. And I'd worked in magazines for a decade, and then I wrote this book, and all of a sudden people were like, oh, you wrote a book, you must know things, like please come speak at this event. So it's this really funny sort of mental flip in how people perceive you after a book comes out. But I would also say that one of the best parts of doing this is getting to spend a chunk of time really going deep on one subject, because in the book you kind of do have to be obsessed with the thing that you're going to write about for a really long time, like probably longer than you think you're going to. But on the other side of that, you come out and you actually know a lot about one thing. So I've been now able to speak about water and that kind of thing. So there has been, the book kind of has to stand for itself, I think, but then there are things that can come out of that. It's sort of like, it's the book is one thing, but like the book afterlife is definitely
Well, you said you
thing.
never really public spoke, right?
Oh no, I was terrified.
Because she was a writer.
Yeah, I think I would assume that, or I think a lot of writers identify as introverts, and spend a lot of time by themselves with their notebooks and with their computers. So all of a sudden, that's another thing. The book comes out, and all of a sudden, you're standing in a bookstore talking to strangers. So that's a whole other life after the book. I guess I don't know if that was really answering your question. But.
Any other questions?
How are you doing, timing?
About
Got one more?
I just wondered, how long did it take you to write yours, and why could you have done it in less than 10?
No pressure. I started working on the proposal in fall of 2015, and then I did the trip in 2016, and then it came out this spring. So 4 years. Yeah. So it takes way longer. The whole process has been a pretty steep learning curve, but that was one of the things that surprised me, just how long the process takes for a book to come out into the world. Yeah, do you think you could have done it faster?
Well, it's funny because she did everything you're supposed to do. Like, she wrote a book proposal, and then, guess when I wrote my book proposal? After my manuscript was bought, right? Because now I have to go, so it's, I did it my way. She did it the traditional way, right? And so I just had to make sure my story was down before I got influenced by anything. So I'm working on book 2, and by golly, I'm going to get it done in 6 months.
I would add, I'm also working on book 2, and I just blew my deadline. So I just got a 6-month extension. If that helps like the sense of how long these things take.
Everyone's different, I guess.
And I think that I'd push back on that a little. I don't think there's any. That's why books are weird. There's not any, especially memoirs, where they're really personal and a lot of it comes out of you. There's not really a right way to do it. And I think I sort of got heady about that at one point. We were like, am I doing it right? Should it have more like this? And especially if you're at the point that you were at where you just have to get it down, I think you can't. It's really easy to get caught in the like, this is what it should be like, this is how long it should take me. And I think that's pretty toxic. Like you're your own worst enemy in a lot of those things, I think.
What are the new books about?
Mine is about ski bums and ski towns and sort of the idea of living the dream and why it's not actually dreamy. So it's economics of ski towns and climate change and mental health in those places.
Wow.
Yeah.
Are you doing U.S. and Canada? Or?
Just U.S., just because it was such a massive
Are you coming to
thing.
Whitefish?
I've done most of the research already. I could come to Whitefish.
What are you writing?
So to make my life easier, I'm collaborating with one of my midwives because we're faster together. See how I'm changing that up now? So, I'm telling the story from my dog's point of view. And it's going to be fiction, so there's just really exciting. And it's probably going to be maybe for like 6th graders to 15-year-olds. It's like this super dog story for sure. So we'll see where that goes. That's probably more likely to be made into a movie. So having said that, so from my literary agent, Bob, immediately, because he's really good in the whole New York City scene and the book part of things, so he immediately got me a Hollywood book to film agent who I've never met because, one of the reasons why we shop these, we write books is hoping somebody will make a film out of it. Because writers, do you guys want to hear, should I say this? Writers don't make money. How do writers make money? Their books
Independent bookstores.
Yeah. I mean, it's a rare day a writer will get, they get their initial payment. What's it called again? Advance. Most, I know New York Times bestsellers that never even got another check after their advance. So it's a long haul for sure. So we can't quit our day job, and we got to create other ways to, maximize our books.
So when you talk about structure, you're talking about like an outline of knowing where you're going to start and where you're going to end.
Yes. You have to have that. I'm going to say, I talk to people, some people say, I'm just going to write. Think of your story as a string of pearls, right? So each pearl is a scene. So some books might have 300 scenes. But it can't be just episodic, right? So there's really kind of 3 components in the story structure or the stakes. So, what's at stake, right? What's at stake if the main character fails? For me, it was a huge stake. I could get killed, my dog could get killed, or we could kill people. So there's the physical stakes. There's also, in a book, you have to have the emotional stakes. Why do we care? And that's like the moral compass, right? Of what, they believe and what they don't believe. And then there's does anybody know what the last stake is? Physical, emotional, and philosophical. Right, because her book's, philosophical. She's got these, what's going to happen to water, right? And so all that has to be woven in, but you have to have an inciting incident. You have to have a midpoint. You have to have plot points. Twists. Yeah. So I recommend all you guys study structure, and there's some really good books on. And it's just like writing a movie. It's the same formula, whether it's fiction or nonfiction.
There's a really good, I don't know if you guys ever read John McPhee. There's a really good John McPhee New Yorker article about structure and all the different ways you can put the pieces together. But I think that like she was saying, if you just went and wrote a book and it was like, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, that's not part of the hard part of, building a narrative is building tension and knowing when to add information. So I think the structure part is such a big part of, you know, making the writing actually come together and sing.
You start with this knowing what the structure is, or do you do this episode, and so on, and then think, okay, that's the structure? I mean, does it emerge?
I think it depends on the Downriver, the river book. I don't think I realized how obvious the structure was in that one, because there's a river is a really clear narrative, and then I started writing the second one, and all of a sudden I was like, oh, I have to actually think about how the pieces come together. So I think a lot of it is for me, and I think probably everybody does it really differently. I'd be curious. I'm sure there's lots of other people in here who do it very differently, but a lot of it is just kind of putting out what the scenes are, what the parts are, what those second questions are, what do you want to get, you know, what do you want to actually be asking in it, and then kind of putting them together. Yeah, I'm not answering this very well because I don't think there's like one right way to do it. Yeah, I think it's like a lot of it is just like digging and rearranging. I know some people do flashcards. Like I think I was listening to some podcast about an author who writes them all down on pieces of paper and then sticks them in a freezer, and then we'll take them out. They have to like sit for a little bit. So I think there's like all sorts of structure can be a lot of different things. How are we doing on time? You have one more?
5 minutes.
What did you learn from the first process that you're now doing differently in the second?
Ooh, good question. I mean, I think what you were saying earlier about structure, structure is important, and I think that community thing, like don't get too in your own head, break away from it, lean on other people, lean on editors, don't be precious with it. It's going to take longer than you think. I think a lot of it is just, I don't know if other people feel like this, but I feel like every morning I wake up and I'm like, today is going to be easy. And I sit down and open the Word document and I'm like, oh man. So I think a lot of it is just knowing, the biggest thing is like, you can grind it out and like knowing that it takes a grind, but that you can. You got a lesson?
No. Structure. I'm about to meet with a Simon & Schuster editor from New York City tomorrow about my book, my synopsis in the first 10 pages, and I have to go in there and, you know, I've got 10 minutes to tell him structure, and I got to go in there and act like I know what I'm doing, what my plot points are, the midpoint, inciting incident, reversals, and then they go, oh, you know, you're a professional, you know what you're talking about. And how do you learn that? Just start listening to, you know, movies are all made like that. And then it's my guide, it's my path, it's my way. And then I write the pearls, each scene, you know, and where does that fit into that whole story structure. So I'll be a lot faster with that. I didn't know it before when I started writing. I'm like, really? Structure?
Any more questions? Thank you so much to Heather and Susan.